Welcome back, Tori.
It's okay.
I am John Jones, leader of the Justice League. As you can see, we met before.
At the office when you were acting so strange.
I apologize for leaving so abruptly. I have only a limited time in human form. Your first alien, I presume?
I met Leonard Nimoy once. Why am I here?
I sought refuge on your planet because my own world had none of the freedoms that you take for granted. I vowed to protect those rights, so I scoured the earth in search of those whose gifts could help me fulfill that dream. You are such a person, Tori.
What are you saying?
We want you to join the Justice League.
But I'm not a superhero.
That young man you saved from drowning would disagree.
I didn't know what I was doing.
You can learn, Tori. I'll teach you, just as I've taught all of them. Do you think they knew what to do when they started? They came upon their gifts just like you did.
Actually, I'm the only other lab accident.
Radioactive deposit in the desert, about the same time the Green Lantern found his ring.
I was born a fire starter.
You should have seen how many they had to put out.
Look, I'm very flattered, but I just want my old life back.
It's no longer there, Tori. You are completely different now from everyone else.
Except for us.
What seems like a curse can become a gift. Either way, it's part of you now. You must decide whether you want to keep on running from it or embrace it.
Welcome to Superhero Cinephiles Podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine. So, longtime listeners will remember that Derek and I had first met through online fan fiction. And back then there was a big range of us who were doing these things. And some of the guys we knew had since been guests on this show. And there was this one guy who was writing at the time. And, you know, me personally, I was okay. I was, you know, not the best, not the worst. Then you had guys like Derek, who were, you know, head and shoulders above everybody else. And at the time, I just put it down to like, well, Derek's, you know, these guys are a lot older than me. But then there was this one guy who was blowing everybody else out of the park. And I'm like, man, this guy's amazing. And I'm like, and then I found out he's the same age as me, which made me like, oh, damn, I really got up my game now. And then just, you know, he'd gotten in touch with me fairly recently. So this is a nice little callback to get in touch with him and reconnect. And that is Will Short. Will, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Perry. I'm very glad to be here. You just blew up my ego completely, so I'll be floating through this entire episode. I miss those days a little bit, the fan fiction days.
Well, yeah. I mean, you were one of the guys... Also, sorry, go ahead.
I was in high school, so I mean, there's something, you know, about being a kid, I guess, is part of what I miss.
Yeah, and you were one of the guys actually who got me interested into the more obscure type of Marvel stuff. Like, it was because of you that I ended up checking out things like Steve Gerber's Defenders and Moon Knight and all that kind of stuff. So all of that was, you know, up to you. And now, like, I've become a huge fan of those characters, and I'm loving now that we're getting Moon Knight on TV. So then a lot of that goes back to what you were writing back in the day.
Well, yeah, man, I'm glad to pass it along. It's something that I think I got from other fan fiction writers that had covered similar characters before, and just the weird stuff, man. I have a taste for it. So if I can pass that along, spread the weird around, mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump into today's movie, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I am currently, I work in podcasts, actually for my job right now. I work as an audio engineer and composer for a podcast production company here in Dallas, Texas, which is where I'm located, where I was born and raised. I'm a musician. I'm a multi-creative type, multi-hyphenate, maybe. That seems like a big thing to say of myself, but I'm a musician. I'm a bit of a comedian. I have written not just fanfic, but some other stuff. And I have a podcast that I co-host with my dear friend Travis Hill called Days Past Tooncast. You can find it wherever you find podcasts. And we discuss, it's a comedy show where we discuss old Saturday morning cartoons, and sometimes not Saturday morning. Just depends. But there's been a lot of superhero action over there, and always a good time. You should check it out. We've covered. Perry, did you ever see the Marvel Superheroes show from cartoon from the 1960s?
Oh, I think I may have saw like maybe 1 or 2 episodes of it.
They basically are just like Jack Kirby drawings that have
right,
been
yeah.
like scanned into a camera, and then the mouths move because it's just the most limited animation. That's amongst the things that we've covered that I thought you might be interested in. It's basically a radio drama, and then with a few pictures that slightly move. Yeah.
I've been checking out your episode feed. I've been meaning to start listening to some of the, especially some of the superhero episodes.
There's a good deal of them in there. Closest thing to Justice League is Super Friends. We did cover a couple Super Friends episodes. So if you're Super Friends fans, if you're superhero fans, we got you.
Yeah. And today we're covering. So I was thinking about this last night as I'm watching today's pick, and and I was thinking to myself, man, it's ballsy of Will to reconnect and then make me watch a movie that's going to make me never want to talk to him again.
I mean, I'd never seen it. I knew it wasn't good. It's famously not good. And yeah, I really wanted to test our friendship right away. I just wanted to see, if you won't leave me over this, you'll never leave me. And that I'll take to the bank.
Here's the thing though, because you were smart. You gave me a list. And I saw this on there, and you gave me a list of a bunch of different movies, and I saw Justice League of America on there. I'm like, well, we just finished covering the very last of the Snyder-directed films. We just did an episode of Man of Steel, and we've covered all the other Justice League live-action movies. I'm like, so might as well go back and look at, and we've been in the midst right now of all the guests are requesting stuff that I do not enjoy watching. And
yes. And
I tweeted last night after I finished watching it, I'm like, well, you know what? We had to do Iron Man 3, we did Man of Steel, we did Spider-Man 3, and all of those I found, I came around on some aspects of it. I don't say I'm a fan of them, but I can appreciate those movies. And that's one of the nice things about doing this podcast is I'm able to go back and look at things that I, hated at first and then come around like, yeah, it's not so bad. Yeah. This is not one of those movies.
There is no redeeming quality about this. I can name a couple things that are like inoffensive about it perhaps, but this is truly and I can wear a smile as I insult this thing, but it's just not good, man. I don't even know what they were going for exactly. I mean, it looks like they were going for about 3,000 different things that were not the right things to go after.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you're not pleasing any fan of the Justice League. You're not pleasing people who like, I guess, comedy, which it's intended to be. You're not pleasing people who are sci-fi fans because it kind of plays out like a Canadian sci-fi, like Saturday afternoon. That's the level of production, and I believe it was shot in Vancouver, that you're looking at. It's just not, it's not palatable.
Yeah.
It's not meant for human consumption.
So obviously we were talking about the 1997 Justice League failed pilot that CBS, I think it was CBS commissioned.
It was CBS, yes.
And it was... Before we get too much into this, why don't you talk a little bit about your history with the Justice League comics?
Sure. Well, I was thinking about it. I was like, well, the comics, I know where they start, but my earliest Justice League or Justice League adjacent exposure was when I was a very small kid. I had superpowers being the next iteration of Super Friends, being a version of the Justice League, slippers that I wore all the time. They were just house slippers that had every superhero from DC on them, Hawkman, Superman, Green Lantern, whoever, and I wish I still had them. I would just have them bronzed and put somewhere in the house. But yeah, Justice League for me began really with Grant Morrison's run on JLA in 1997, the same year that this quote-unquote movie, we'll never call it a film, this 245-minute chunks of smashed together of a show, I guess, came out. It's wild to think that they came out the same year because they could not be more different in scope and everything else. But that, I think I bought, now that I think about it, I think I bought the first trade paperback, the first story, the Pale Martians story, New World Order, they called it, of that run as a trade paperback on its own. Loved it. I bought a Secret Files and Origins that was from that same run where they fought a version of Starro, and the Justice League basically had to give up their powers for the Spectre to allow them to go into a building to fight Starro, because otherwise they would be taken over and threaten the whole world. All that stuff I knew there was something about it. I was pretty young when I read it. I didn't have the appreciation nor the knowledge or the maturity that would be required to understand maybe Morrison's oeuvre at that time. I just knew these were good comics.
Yeah.
These were good superhero comics that were smart, and that's, as I understand it, what they were writing for was like a smart 13-year-old. And that turned me onto the Justice League big time. And then later, when I read more issues of it, I mean, I got so into that, specifically that run, and then a lot of Mark Waid's run that came after that I started branching out and reading a bunch more stuff from them or involving them, but also started a Justice League based fan fiction site at the time, which you wrote Superman for.
Very briefly, which was very terrible at first, and then eventually I did some other Superman stuff that was much better afterwards. That's
right. But it was that kind of thing where I could no sites that would have had Justice League were open to write Justice League, and so I just said, okay, I'll start a site so that I can write Justice League. It was purely selfish reasons, but it's that kind of like 14, 15-year-old energy of like, I'll make it happen, and I have to do this because I'm so inspired by just this bravura display of superhero writing. It's what it is. It's just fun superhero stuff, and all the big blockbuster moments that you would want from the things that the Zack Snyder Justice League did not deliver for me, but those blockbuster things you would have assumed you would have seen in a Justice League movie.
Which probably you figured out once you started writing it, which is something I figured out too, and kind of something we were talking about before we started recording, is that it's one thing to see these big epic things on the page. It's another thing when you're trying to write it with just words.
Yes, and Grant Morrison had on their side that they are also an artist. I mean, clearly just a great creative force in general.
Right.
But the thinking visually was working with Howard Porter. Who it was such an interesting artist, like not who I would have thought to put on that book at the time, but really was kinetic and drew big. And those were the things that would draw your eye regardless of anatomy or whatever else. It was kind of cartoony in its way. But that, I ended up being a really big fan. It drew me into other characters in the DC universe that, Martian Manhunter included, that being like a major, like the heart of Morrison's run. But I'd already been a big Green Lantern fan. Kyle Rayner was my Green Lantern, because I picked up those issues when they were coming out. I actually pulled out for this episode my Kyle Rayner action figure from the Extreme Justice line.
I remember that. I had that one too. Yeah.
It's so funny, and of course the Green Lantern in this particular Justice League we watched kind of looks like him. It's not him, but it's based costume-wise on him. But I ended up just looking. The Silver Age stuff is what it is. It's like, it's important, but I'm not going to sit there and read it all day. But I really ended up enjoying the JLI, the Justice League International, the J.M. DeMatteis, and
Giffen? I think it was Keith Giffen.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Keith Giffen. A lot of their run actually, which is more what seems to have been they've been trying to ape with this movie that we watched. I really enjoyed that. It's funny because I was thinking about it coming up around the time when Morrison's JLA came out. There was a post Justice League International version of the Justice League that I read a bunch of issues of. It was actually written by Gerard Jones, who is unfortunately has a history now. But
really? I didn't hear about that.
It happened a while ago. Like I just for the sake of time, I won't go into it. But he is in jail now.
Oh wow!
But yeah. But he was writing this version of the Justice League around 0 Hour. If you're a DC fan, you may remember 0 Hour. Post that, it was like Wonder Woman, Flash, Metamorpho, Hawkman was there. It was like it wasn't Superman, it wasn't Batman. So it was kind of a Supermanless, Batmanless, but also you had Tasmanian Devil, you had Ice Maiden, not Ice. Ice was dead, and Ice is in this version of the Justice League we watched. That was my exposure, was like Ice was this dead, basically a refrigerator woman, who was killed, and now everybody misses, and she's so innocent, and now here's this other Ice woman. But that I realized that was, and Fire was there too, who's also in the one we watched. So that I loved the art on it at the time more than anything else. It was just kind of bubbly and cartoony. But that was really my first. I had to think back and like, oh no, I did love the Justice League. It was just this weird, 30-issue run that came at the between eras, before Morrison, after the other stuff. I haven't followed a lot of comics since probably the early 2000s. I'll dip into things, but Justice League, I did check out the Jeff Johns, Jim Lee. I don't know if it was New 52. Who knows?
Yeah, that was New 52.
It just wasn't. Yeah, the art was pretty, I guess, but it was just not my cup of tea. Like, I was thinking about it because watching this show, I was like, why isn't this an acceptable version of the Justice League to me? Because with Batman, you can do any number of versions. You can do the campiest thing in the world. I mean, quality is the main issue we're dealing with here. Right. But with the Avengers, even though there is a kind of a core Avengers, there's no one member or even three members that have to be there for it to be the Avengers, or even what their concept is, because I think in the Avengers run, we're talking like within 20 issues, everything has changed. It's in their DNA for the team to change and be different scale levels and all of that. Whereas the Justice League, even though we've had a few versions, they often stick to just one of a few things. There's only so many versions of the Justice League, and this is not really what we see today.
Yeah, it's funny because even when I think about stuff like, Jim Lee, the Jeff Johns, Jim Lee stuff, which, it's good. It's not, I'm not knocking it. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it didn't, and I don't think this is just something like no other writer really has managed to kind of capture that magic the way Morrison really did. Because you mentioned Mark Waid's. I loved Mark Waid's run, but it just felt like there's that one missing ingredient. And every single Justice League, they've been very good. There's been nothing wrong with them. Dwayne McDuffie did a good stuff on it, where he completely, basically had like a completely different team too, without all of these mainstay characters, even the versions of, the classic characters like Batman and Wonder Woman were not, Bruce Wayne and Diana. So had these different takes on it. And Scott Snyder's doing Justice League, or he was, I'm not sure if he still is. I've only read a little bit of that, but it's good. But I don't know. There was something about Morrison doing that book. It was magic. And it was and I thought Porter was a really good choice with that run, because Porter's style really kind of fit this widescreen stories that Morrison was telling. Like if you put Porter on, say, Morrison's X-Men stuff, it would not have worked as well. But on it was amazing. And then especially when he brought on, Frank Quitely to do Earth 2, that was just unbelievable. That's an incredible piece of work, that whole thing. I mean, obviously I'm a huge fan of Frank Quitely, and anything that, I guess I've really only ever read anything he's done has always been written by Grant Morrison, minus like a Destiny short that was in the Sandman hardcover that was like a story for each of the Endless, and that was just kind of a series of images. It was great art. It just wasn't a story. But yeah, Frank Quitely, that Earth 2 is such a great piece. It is hilarious. It's beautifully drawn. It is intelligent. It is everything that you would like. That was great about Morrison's run, kind of wrapped up in one place. And yeah, it is like a sci-fi for kids with big colors. And one of the things, it's clearly there's a lot more at work, but like Grant Morrison is a famously great writer of one-liners. And it is essentially an action movie that you're watching. There's the moment where everything is lost and you're all huddled in a room and you're talking about how you're going to overcome this thing, and then the next panel is 2 pages of every person on Earth has superpowers now. It's that kind of like tension release thing, and those being punctuated with some of these great one-liners, or just dialogue in general. That is his sprinkles on top of great art and a cool plot that he's already put together. And all these other writers have that ability. It's just a different voice, I guess. But his relationship with their relationship with the Justice League, I think, also informed all that. Because if you read that book, Super Gods, that they wrote, that was amazing. Yeah, it's
so good, and it really this was like a mythic event for them, and it meant something to them, and they're just a unique talent, a very unique talent. That obviously, I mean, continues to be.
And I thought his Justice League too, or their Justice League, did this great job of taking the Silver Age ideas and really kind of modernizing it. Whereas something like, as much as I love All-Star Superman, that was just almost complete Silver Age throwback stuff. There wasn't a whole lot of modern sensibility on it. Whereas JLA had this perfect melding of those two. I thought it's one of his, and in retrospect, like it's probably some of their best work when I think about it now. Just like that, being able to do all these different things in such a mainstream book.
It is. You see. I've read most pretty much anything that they wrote for DC or Vertigo or for Marvel, including Marvel Boy. I never read Skrull Kill Crew, but not out of not trying. I just never owned it. I've read most of their mainstream work and some of the other things too, and I'm including in mainstream things like The Invisibles, which is like a spiritual text for me. That's a very important piece of work, and certainly to their work at large. Like you can find, I mean, they were writing that at the same time as JLA, and if you read some of what they've said in interviews, like there were things that were kind of jumping between the two. There was energy feeding off of each other in those ways, but there's just something about that run, and that was also one of the few times you saw Grant Morrison probably really having to obey and deal with dumb things from other editorial things at DC, where it's like, guess what? Batman is this person, or they're not available. Wonder Woman is now her mom, by the way, so you got to deal with that.
Superman now has energy powers.
Exactly, and then wrestles an angel, and it's an awesome scene. It's like the coolest use of electric blue Superman you could ever have.
Well, that was the funny thing about that, because that was Morrison that had that force on him, and he used the electric blue Superman in a better way than any of the actual Superman writers did.
Yes, and it shows how this person really was just made to write great superhero comics. And for all ages, I will highlight each time, I think that JLA, I've said it before, I believe they said this, but I think part of the beauty of it is that it's not trying to be any more than it is. It's trying to be a cool sci-fi superhero book that's big ideas, big things happening, and it's not trying to talk down to, nor is it trying to anyone, nor is it trying to become Watchmen or anything so big-minded as that, even though it is very galaxy-brained in its own way.
I think that's
just trying to be fun comics.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate about Morrison as I get older is the fact that, because you look at a lot of these kind of like so-called like edgy or avant-garde writers that were doing comics back in the late 90s, early 2000s. You had Morrison, you had Ellis, you had Mark Miller, Garth Ennis, and all of them. And with a lot of them, there sometimes is this almost like disdain for the superhero stuff. Whereas that never happens with Morrison. It's always like a love letter in some way. Even when he's subverting everything about the superhero genre, there's still that love for it.
He continues to find the superhero charming no matter what. No matter, and it is the, instead of the derision of I'm going to point at this and say how dumb it is and pull its pants down, it is kind of a gentle ribbing or a loving ribbing from you're like, I love this thing and that's why I can make fun of it. But I mean, of the other writers that you listed, I think certainly Ellis and Ennis both have basically just said, I hate superheroes. I think they're dumb. And it's like, that's cool. I mean, he still wrote some superhero stuff, that I liked, so I don't really care. But there is definitely a passion that translates that I get a different energy. My cup is filled differently reading something that is written by Morrison, who likes the people and the very idea of what they're writing, versus these other writers, when they write that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that really came into focus for me when I read, like you said, Super God, because I think that was it is just a pure love letter to the superhero genre and superhero comics. And so if anyone hasn't read that book, please go ahead and buy it. It's a regular book. It's not a comic book. So if you're, so you have to read actual words, but it's a good book. It's very, very worth the read. And I also came into Justice League, the comics, through Morrison. Although I had some, you showed the Extreme Justice figure. Like I had all those figures back in the day. And then there was a Justice League Task Force video game fighting game on Sega and Super Nintendo way back in the day that I played a bunch. So that was like my introduction to Justice League. And I remember, because I was reading Wizard at the time and they were talking about Morrison's Justice League and seeing the lineup of, these big six DC iconic characters: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman. And then you've got Martian Manhunter. I'm like, who the hell is that guy? I'm like, why would you put him on this team? And then I actually read JLA and I'm like, oh, wow, this guy's amazing. And that run turned me into a fan of Martian Manhunter. So much so that when they rebooted, when they did the New 52 and they left him out and they replaced him with Cyborg, I got so pissed off because I'm like, he's Mr. Justice League. You have to have him there.
it is an interesting thing that character became, that Martian Manhunter became that. I think I was thinking about it today because I listened back to you and Derek talking about the original release of Justice League. And I think y'all talked about Martian Manhunter a bit at that point. And yeah, I mean, and what I know of Martian Manhunter and the character of Martian Manhunter, like what my ideal almost assuredly came from reading Grant Morrison's Justice League.
Absolutely.
Because they wrote the character with a wisdom and a warmth and also a hint of tragedy without really, there's no captions of like what Martian Manhunter is thinking of. It's just there in the portrayal. But I was thinking about like, what does this character bring to the table that maybe no other character does, that I mean, and put aside a power set or whatever. Like we have aliens that can fly, that can, fire beams and lift things, and even characters that have loss. I mean, Batman would maybe be the closest thing to Martian Manhunter as far as I experienced this loss versus Superman, who is, there was a loss before I even was born or right after I was born. I don't remember this tragedy. But John Jones, Martian Manhunter, he seems to always have somewhere in the back of his head or in his heart that things can be lost, and he never wants to experience that again. That the loss of his family and his planet, that is something that happened when he was an adult. And, this trauma happened at a time when like life had settled for him. Right. And that there, aside from all the other cool, kind of peaceful aspects about the character, the meditation, these other things that have been attached to that, I feel like there's that level of humaneness comes from that. I mean, I'm sure it's already something that he was before he lost all those things, but it gives a very different feel. It gives an elder statesman feel, even if the character isn't meant to be however many years old. That is a heart that is heavy with something that is not even a child trauma, but something that is, I will not let this happen to my new family. And that is, I mean, to me, the Justice League may not be a family to all of the members that are in it. Right. I think Superman probably thinks of them as family. I don't think Batman thinks of them as family, for instance. That's my opinion. But Martian Manhunter, I think, and many characters he experiences, they're family to him. And probably the Earth is family to him because he's lost an entire planet before, I mean, essentially. So that character is such a good fit for any version, whether it's he can be the lesser known in a group of icons, or he can be the elder statesman in a group of, I mean, something that this show that we watched gets way wrong, in my opinion, is that the Justice League would ever be a place where people are being trained to be superheroes. That's like, this is the varsity league. That is, I mean, I know that there have been times in Justice League comics where that's not true, where we take on recruits, or even the Detroit era Justice League, where it's like all new people and Aquaman and Martian Manhunter. That's not my version of the Justice League, how it should be. That's the Outsiders, or that's the Teen Titans, or something.
No, I agree with you. I've always felt that it should be it's supposed to be the A-list team. Like, it's not supposed to be I think you lose something when you get away. And I think the Avengers too, to a certain extent as well. They're supposed to be the big leagues. That's why I got really annoyed when, I know we're going off track, but that always happens here. But when, when Bendis was doing Avengers, that was the things that kind of bugged me, is that it kind of took this idea of like, everybody's an Avenger now. It takes something special is lost when you do that.
Absolutely, it does. I mean, and I like the Avengers. I mean, again, to me, the Avengers, I mean, one of the main differences between Avengers and Justice League is that there's a scrappiness to the Avengers, even when they are fully, Cap, Thor, Iron Man, whatever. Right. There's something about them that feels kind of glued together, and that's just partly a Marvel thing too, because I don't know, like Iron Man, as powerful as he is, feels like he's on maybe like one tick down power-wise from where the really powerful DC characters are. But the Justice League, just scrappy is never a term I would use for the Justice League. It is the UN. They've shown up. They're here. They've got the big hammer. It's going to happen because there's a level 10 threat, not, this robot is giving us trouble today. How do we do about it? Yeah.
And with Martian Manhunter especially, I think it's really telling that when they did the Justice League animated series, all the other characters had some other background they're coming in from. Martian Manhunter is the only one whose origin is completely tied to the Justice League in that.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense as a storytelling tool as well, because also in New Frontier, I don't know if you watched that.
Oh yeah.
The animation of that, and that was already written into the comic story originally that it was adapted from anyway. But yeah, there's something. I think there's when you have a story where and it happens again, and it's not done well, but in the Justice League movie that we watched, Martian Manhunter is a good character as a center point, because there is that attitude of, I can be a sage advice person to you. I can be a wise man. I can be a support. I can be a victim because I'm an other. I am someone who is vulnerable. He doesn't play that role here, but he can play a lot of, it fits because he's also a shapeshifter. So keep that in mind. But he can fill a lot of different types of roles, but there also is just an inherent, again, humaneness and just likability. When I say innocence, I really mean like a pureness of heart, that even if your 6 or 7 other characters are, let's say, all rookies and have just met each other and aren't getting along, this person, maybe partly because of a telepathy thing, or maybe just empathy even, can kind of crack away at the icy exterior of people and draw them together, at least each one to him. And then those people find themselves, they're orbiting the same person and supporting that same person. I think I'm putting a lot more, and not to blow up my own spot, but I don't feel like that anyone's doing that on purpose. I think that's just the use of the character ends up being that, and many writers have found that, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah.
But that as a reader, that draws me the same things that would draw those characters to him. Like, it seems like if somebody hurts John, Martian Manhunter, then someone in the Justice League is going to get red-eyed and just ruin somebody's life if John gets hurt. It's like, you don't touch John. He's the nice guy.
Yeah. And so this movie, so it came out in 1997, and it apparently aired only in a few places. It didn't air everywhere, but I'd heard it described as an unaired pilot, but it did apparently air some places. Most places it didn't. And it was obviously not picked up for a very good reason. But you said you would just watch it for this. You'd never seen it before, right?
That's right. I actually watched it twice for this. So if that's any penance for making you watch it for this, I fell asleep a few times watching it the first time. So
this is actually my second time watching it. I had first watched it back in the early 2000s. Another guy who was in our fanfic circles, he had all these bootlegs of all these different comic book properties and TV shows. So you had the X-Men animated series, he had the Avengers animated series, he had the Justice League pilot, a bunch of other stuff. And and he burned me copies and he sent them to me in the mail. So I had watched it that time, and I'm like, oh God, this is so bad. So when we thought about watching, I'm like, all right, it'll be interesting to go back and rewatch stuff, because there's been stuff that we've watched on this show that at the time I thought, this is terrible. Go back and rewatch it. I'm like, oh, okay, it wasn't as bad as I thought. The Nick Fury telefilm, it's actually got some good things about it. The original Doctor Strange telefilm from 1978, actually, bad effects aside, it's actually pretty solid TV drama, especially for the late 70s.
Yeah.
But you watch this, and like you said, it came out the same year as Morrison's JLA, and it's just utter dog shit. And Mark Waid had famously said that this is 80 minutes of his life that he'll never get back. Yep. And so now it's been 160 minutes of my life that I'll never get back.
Hey, at least we're on the same boat as far as time spent on it. It is very difficult to sit through, and it's not even so much, it's one thing, there's not a camp factor, intentional or otherwise, like a Rocky Horror Picture Show or a bad movie where you're entertained by, they're attempting something great and failing, or they're trying something and it's so weird and it's some person's one weird director's vision that they happen to get through, past the batter, and then you're like, wow, this is entertaining because I can't imagine how this even got made. This is so bland. There's a lot of things that are offensive to see, especially as a Justice League fan, but it is also just so bland. It is so white bread, in almost literally white bread, that's what makes it so hard to watch for me, is that they don't even draw me in with how bad it is. They don't take any big swings, And
it drags. It
so
drags.
Well,
I was sitting there, I'm just looking at I'm like, how is there still a fucking hour left in this thing?
Well, because and not that I expected to see fisticuffs or flying battles or something like that. I'm sure the budget was quite low. The effects do not. I mean, the costumes look like they're made out of Nerf. So it tells you right up front if you see a still of this, it is exactly what it looks like. But the thing is, the threat is the weather. The villain controls the weather. He is not someone who will face you directly in any way, who can threaten you as like on a 1-to-1 or man-on-team basis. Yeah. And so the team spends a lot of time either just dealing with the weather or way more than that, their personal lives. And that is the weirdest pairing of concepts for me, is that this is it seems like meant to be not a Friends-style sitcom as far as format, because it's not a multi-camera, on a set kind of thing. It's not that kind of comedy. It's like a one-camera comedy, but also a drama that happens to have superhero elements. I guess it would be, I think Lois and Clark was going on at the time. And I think it might have ended by this point, but very similar time frame. Yeah. There you go. It's the closest like relative, it seems like. Not that it's just that it's a live action DC show that has superheroes and has comedic and romantic elements to it, that it's supposed to be more of a draw than just an action adventure. And this doesn't have that much action adventure. And it's just, the Justice League is not a great fit. Even the humorous version that was the 80s, Justice League International version, it's not a great fit for I'm in the suburbs, or I'm at my job today. I can't hold down a job. These are character types that are more fitting of street level characters, or even just other characters than the ones they chose. Yeah. Which ultimately they kind of just seem to choose character types and then apply DC characters to those character types. Because, for instance, I mean, the Flash on here is the most glaring example. Oh, or ruinous, example of, you have Barry Allen, the Flash, and I'm open, like, I'm not going to lose sleep over a bad or out of my mind version, like a version of something that's not what I think it should be. It's like, there's different versions of Barry Allen out there, and that's fine with me. Yeah. But this version, like, if Friends was popular at the time, and it was, they basically tried to cast your three main male heroes, exactly, the Atom, Green Lantern, and the Flash, as Joey, Chandler, and Ross. And the Atom is a good fit for Ross. Why not? He's a scientist, whatever. And then they seem to have decided that Barry Allen should be Joey from Friends. He's a jock. He has a little bit of like a Northeastern accent. He kind of just seems dumb. He can't hold down a job. And these are things that, if anything, I would switch that character type with Guy Gardner. Exactly. The Green Lantern. Yeah. And I know they're not, and then Guy Gardner here is not Guy Gardner, Green Lantern. They're using the name. I believe it's because Hal Jordan was licensed elsewhere. And I don't know if that's accurate. There was I'm not sure, because I think part of it was the fact they were kind of basing it on the Giffen DeMatteis run, and Guy Gardner was the Green Lantern in that one. But at the same time too, I mean, you've got this idea of these two male characters who are friends, and who one of them has kind of got his shit together. The other one, is kind of a mess. And it's like, why wouldn't you just do Blue Beetle and Booster Gold then? Oh, well, I mean, I'm going to assume that some of it's for, like, let's get some characters that I totally agree. And I think that the version of this that I would, if I could go back and exert some control over it, for starters, I would say don't pick any big characters except for maybe one character. Maybe Martian Manhunter could still be in it, but everyone else is a B level or C level character. But yeah, it is. Those would be a great fit. And I even think just the Flash may like be late to everything. That's Barry Allen's old joke. Right. But he has his life together. He's a very intelligent person who isn't just a meathead. And you already have in Guy Gardner, the actual Guy Gardner from the comics, you have one of the things that's missing from this show, which is an asshole. Like, nobody is the fire for the gasoline. Everybody on the show, and not even the character Fire. I mean, she has a little bit of spice that she throws in by like kind of nudging Guy Gardner and kind of shitty flirting with him. But nobody is rude to anybody else. Yeah. No one busts anybody's balls. And like that, it's so toothless that, and that's true of all the comedy on the whole thing too. Not that negativity has to be there, but you have Guy Gardner, a famously asshole-ish character. Yeah. Why not just make him a jerk? Like that would have put something. Yeah, absolutely. And something too about this movie is it's just
so you've got the character drama aspect of it, and then you've got the superhero aspect of it. And if you're gonna play to one of those strengths, you should be good at one of those things. Like if you mentioned, thinking about the two versions of Justice League we've had, the movies. You've got the Whedon cut and the Snyder cut. And the Whedon cut, where it was really good at, something that we'd really liked, and you'll remember this because you said you'd re-listened to it recently, is that the character stuff is pretty good in there. The character interactions are a lot of fun to watch. And in the Snyder cut, visually it's, he's amazing. But the character stuff's not as much there. And this one, it's got shitty superhero stuff because they've got a budget of like, I don't even know what the budget is. It's like, it makes Steel's budget look astronomical in comparison.
Well, I mean, the closest thing I can think of is there were so many Canadian shot sci-fi shows that were on around this time. On Saturday afternoon is when they were always on for me, usually on Fox or some affiliate. Babylon 5, which I have respect for, but like that, it's sub Babylon 5.
Yeah.
Honestly, there are times where if you have a local lawyer that makes crazy commercials, it looks like they did a local lawyer commercial where they're a superhero. It's that level of special effects on it. So yeah, the budget must have been quite low. And also, let's just, to be fair, the vocabulary of superheroes on screen, certainly on television, was not very, it's certainly not what it is now, clearly.
Right.
And it's not established. So, I mean, there's a certain amount of that that's quaint when you have like, the atom shrink down and the background is bigger than him, but it's also like a still image, and it's that kind of thing. But yeah, it does just, it's instantly off-putting because of how bad it looks. That's,
well, I mean, even if you compare it to other superhero stuff at the time, like you compare it to the early 90s Flash TV series, that would had a lot better effects than this one did. I mean, that costume looks so much better than whatever they put this guy in.
I know, and I mean, the costumes are just poor in the first place, and the thing that stuck out to me is that the Flash, we'd already had the Flash in the early 90s, and it looked pretty great, that costume. It was just the costume from the comics. I guess it had more of the nose thing, which is maybe more Wally West's deal. I don't remember. But like, it's a classic costume. And for some reason, they just decided to throw some like pseudo Batman stuff on his face and throw Wolverine-ish like lightning bolts coming out of his head. And it just felt like, you don't even have to muck with this, guys. You already have something that works.
Yeah.
I mean, with Green Lantern, they went basically with the Kyle Rayner design with the crab mask. And honestly, it's not a good look. It's just not the worst look I've ever seen. But it does. This character, Guy Gardner, who looks like Kyle Rayner, runs into his friend as Green Lantern, and it just highlights. You would absolutely know who anybody with just a domino mask is on. Like, I think we all know this, but this is proof positive. You should know if your loved one has a domino mask on. If they show up, you would know the difference.
Or like, Fire is the most glaring example of it, because she just has, she doesn't even wear a mask. She just has face paint. And it's like,
spray paint. Yeah.
Yeah. Which also, by the way, it's so weird to see David Krumholtz in this movie.
I know. I mean, and this is him. Like, he's already done Addams Family Values. He's already done the Santa Claus. He's a little bit older. He's not. When I saw his name in the cast list, I was like, "Oh, cool. Who is he going to play? Is he going to play a sidekick? What is he?" And this is the fact that we even have this character tells you what is weird about this show. That there is a character who is purely a unrequited love interest for one of the Justice League members, who his whole role is just to kind of bug her.
It's like.
To bug Fire.
And he's really creepy too in it. Like, I'm watching, Jesus Christ, he's like showing up at her house like at 8 o'clock in the morning and shit.
For start, like Krumholtz, he's good in the role. Like, I mean, he's one of the better screen presences. He just kind of he is charming despite the fact that he's being creepy. He's also like, when he lies about his age and says he's 22, so you're to assume that he is underage. It does make the whole thing just, I mean, obviously a different time, not that made it okay, just that we were less concerned with these things. But he's hitting on Michelle Hurd as Fire, Bibi DaCosta, and it's just like she should just be walking away from this situation and not allowing him near her. It's just this tortured logic of, or you have to really suspend disbelief to allow this to play out. And if it was funny, I mean, that's the thing. At the end of the day, I will forgive almost anything and not even notice plot holes, weird character choices, if something is funny or entertaining. Yeah. But the humor of this show, there's just no jokes in the script. some of the jokes, a lot of them, and this is a 90s thing especially, are just, if you're being sarcastic, that equals a joke.
Yeah.
If you go like, yeah, that just happened, that's a joke. Not like that's not enough. And if you have someone who's especially charismatic, a comedic actor, which Krumholtz to me is, and not that he got those lines, but that's part of why when he's on screen, I'm interested. A lot of these actors at this point, at least, don't have that. So the script isn't there, and they're not elevating the script a lot of the time, which I don't blame them. It's, what are you going to do? But like some of them are barely have worked before or after, it looked like. Obviously Michelle Hurd, who plays Fire, she was a soap opera actor who had been on New Worlds or something along those lines for like 6 years before this. So she has more presence. The guy who plays the Atom,
and she's been on a bunch of stuff since then. Like she's been done a lot of
she's on Picard now, and she's
on
great.
Picard. I actually found her to be I think maybe other than David Krumholtz, she's the only one who feels like, she should be in a different movie.
A little bit, yeah.
Like, because she seems to actually do a pretty decent job with what she's given. Like, I can actually buy her character, and even like her costume it's terrible, but it's still, because it's so basic, it's still better than what everyone else is in.
Everyone else is wearing, like, all the guys are pretty much wearing stuff that is weirdly bulky. Like even the Atom almost looks like he's dressed like the Al Pratt Atom, the original Golden Age Atom, in a way, because of the bulkiness of what he's wearing.
And it's so weird because
he's not
the bulkiness. It makes him look fat. Like it makes him look so much fatter than that actor is.
It's a bad look. Well. And keep in mind, like, this is pre-Iron Man. This is nobody is in the kind of shape that you would find on a Marvel TV show now. Like, to even be an extra on Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you got to be 1,000 times more shredded than anyone is on this show. And that's okay. Not to blame them. I'm not built like that. Just that it's a funny image to just kind of see normal people in tight costumes, like people that are just average build. That would never happen today. Not even the Atom, who's
not even
a professor, not
even trying to have like, padded muscles or anything like that. It's just
and I do. Here's the thing. I think this concept of a superhero sitcom or thereabouts that is maybe a 45-minute show, even with this weird element that was novel at the time, which is the mockumentary Talking Heads. Like, it's way sub Christopher Guest, level, or even the Office level Talking Heads. But those elements mixed together with superhero stuff, I think, especially now, could absolutely be done with existing or not with existing characters. I don't know if you saw the version of The Tick that was on Amazon Prime. Very funny show, and not that it's this concept, but that it was funny is the main thing. And that was the trick. You had good actors, you had good scripts, and that's really what, to me, again, this is lacking big time. But I don't mind the idea of this show where it is let's balance our lives with this stuff, with being superheroes. But they don't have the chops, and it makes it just, and you're, like you said, it just goes by so slowly. You could have done everything they did in 30 minutes. Probably a 22-minute episode probably could have covered this.
Yeah. The drag is so weird, because I was thinking about this and I'm like, okay, so the Whedon cut was 2 hours. The Snyder cut was 4 hours. This is 80 minutes. And somehow this feels so much longer.
Well, it gives us, I never saw, I still need to see it sometime. I never saw the Whedon cut. As somebody who loves Justice League, I was just kind of off the whole DC universe in the movies kind of thing at that point. And I was like, well, I'll see it someday, but I'm not in a rush. And then when the Snyder one came out, I was like, I want to see what's happening here. I'm not a fan of this guy and his work, but like, I want to know what would be missing out on. So I still need to go back and watch that. But I know that as much as I didn't love the Snyder thing, it had things that were entertaining for me.
Yes,
even sometimes just stuff even if I didn't like it, I thought it was entertaining. And then, of course, there were parts of it that did work. And that's what this just doesn't have. For 80 minutes, you just don't get any treats, basically. You just sit through the thing. Yeah. Like, I think the thing that I can point to, like, is saying, well, one, they hired Miguel Ferrer, which is always a good idea. He's great. And him playing, it was funny because I was like, look, I know him from RoboCop. That's my main Ferrer reference. But I just, if he's there, you know he's going to be good and he's going to be important. It's like the Law and Order thing where it's like if there's a special guest, they're going to be the bad guy. And that's who he plays. He plays the weatherman. But he's actually done a lot. I was looking up his career. He created Comet Man with a friend for Marvel Comics. This is not a well-known character, but I had no idea, like, I remember looking at that character in the Marvel Universe handbook or whatever, and just been like, so that this actor who I now love, who also is on this thing, created that. He wrote a graphic novel called The Dreamwalker, which is basically The Shadow. It's like that kind of pulpy thing that they did for Marvel graphic novels. But he's played the Weather Wizard, the voice of the Weather
He did it
Wizard
on Superman, the animated series, yeah.
Yeah, and he played Aquaman there. He played Deathstroke on a Teen Titans cartoon. He played John Jones on Martian Manhunter on the New Frontier cartoon. So this guy's like all over. I just had no idea because some of that stuff I've seen, some I haven't. But he's just all over that. That's like number one thing to enjoy here is just that he's good on screen. He has Krumholtz also being good. I do think I didn't love her performance, but what's her name? Kim Oja? Is that how I would pronounce it? I guess?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, who plays Ice is about a perfect casting choice, not just physically, but like her voice and her kind of her lightness as a person is a good casting choice for Ice. Now, there's probably 1,000 people that you could also choose, but she fits this kind of like, I've got bangs, I'm kind of sporty, I'm a very kind person, the lightness in her voice and everything, that fits her. It's not that I loved her performance, but it wasn't bad, but it was like, oh, that would be that character. That is
I see.
Close to Ice as I understand her. But yeah, otherwise you're suffering the whole time. They don't even make you laugh. And that's the worst crime it can commit.
Well, I mean, I think the thing about Miguel Ferrer is, and I think he actually is like a big comic book fan, if I'm not mistaken. But the thing about him is that, yeah, he's good, but he's not as good as you'd expect when you see Miguel Ferrer's in this. And it's just like, and I think part of it is just like, even he seems bored by this movie.
Oh, yeah, of course he is. I mean, they don't give him much to do. At one point, he is filming himself like on a belt-based camera that's aiming himself. It's pretty funny, actually, that unintentionally, I think. But no, I agree. I mean, I think sometimes even the great actors will show up and will do what the paycheck is paid for, not necessarily the 100% that they can bring. But he also has, I think there's a thing to look at here, which is the experience level of some of the actors, and who knows what all they've done in the past. Like, there isn't just down on IMDb, like where they've trained or whatever, but he's someone who had worked a lot at that point. I mean, honestly, the guy who plays the Atom, John Cassier, like he had also done a lot of voice work. He was the Crypt Keeper on Tales from the Crypt, but he had also done like a bunch of episodes of this Delta Burke HBO sports sitcom, which is not to say that's good stuff, but it is about being a character in front of a camera for an extended period of time. And it's not like it's not that I love his performance, but he feels like someone who is there to play a bit. Like, I kind of believe that Ray Palmer in this kind of schlubby version of Ray Palmer is kind of one that I could get on board with. It's not my favorite. But a lot of these people don't. I mean, the guy who played the Flash, Kenny Johnston, like he has like a News Radio and a Boy Meets World credit, I think. And it's not even to take a dump on anybody. I mean, there's a lot that's wrong before you get the actors on the set here, but it seems like there's nobody that's leading the charge. Like, where's our one big star that is the main character of these 6 characters, or how many it is? You know, there's not somebody there that you can just point to and be like, that's my guy, and I'm on board as long as they're here, and then everyone else will learn to love.
And that's the weird thing too. I'm pretty sure Miguel Ferrer, his agent probably called him up and said, hey, they want you to do Justice League of America, and he's just like, okay, I'm in. And just being a comic fan. That's a wonderful point. Yeah. It's probably like, it's 2 days of work, by the way. You'll probably be, because it's not like he has to do a whole lot. He has to do some it's funny because I saw the Batman recently, and Miguel Ferrer is playing the Weatherman, which is kind of the Weather Wizard, I guess, a version, a weather villain. What do they ever do? They control the weather. And he has this meteorological institute, I guess. His name is Dr. Eno. That's all we ever know him as. But like, he just has a machine that's creating catastrophes of weather. And he keeps appearing to the public in what looks like the Riddler costume kind of from the Batman, and doing this whole, like, my voice has changed, you know, like if you're on 2020 and you want to remain anonymous, like doing that kind of voice change thing. And I mean, he's such a
charismatic person. I think to put him behind a mask and goggles and only get to do those scenes on a screen, like where he's a James Bond villain addressing the world, that is a misuse of his abilities, I think. Obviously, this whole thing is he's a great actor. Was a great actor. Rest in peace.
Oh, but, did he pass away? I didn't know that.
I believe he passed away in 2017.
Okay.
Him and then
okay.
the guy who played Martian Manhunter,
David Ogden Stiers,
Stiers, who I was not familiar with, but now I know that I've seen him because he was on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and amongst other things that he's done. He's been working since like the 70s.
MASH is what he was most famous for, I think.
That's right. MASH. So that's the thing about this also that was really interesting. I mean, it's his portrayal of Martian Manhunter is certainly not a bad one. Nobody's. I don't think anyone's turning in bad work, and certainly he's not getting this version of the character, which is really much more Professor Xavier than anything
I was thinking
else.
that too. Yeah.
It's the way that they treat the Justice League and its members in this, because Tori Ice, she has newly gained this power to have cold powers, I guess. And then all these other people have powers already and already doing these things. They figure out that she has powers, and Martian Manhunter facilitates them bringing her to their Justice League hideout under the ocean, under a bridge with graffiti on it, and test her powers. And he's just talking to her in the dark. And I know I don't like the idea of Professor Xavier as like a purely Machiavellian character, but that's way more a Professor Xavier thing to do, to kidnap somebody. Like, didn't he do this to Shadowcat, at least in Pride of the X-Men? I know he did. Like, you just bring him in and you test him, and like Martian Manhunter has too much compassion, I think, to ever do that to somebody. But and then when they finally kind of jump her into the gang by doing that, into being a member of the Justice League, they keep talking about how like we're different and no one understands us.
Yeah.
And you're scared, and it's just complete X-Men stuff, which you can do this with people, but like some of them Green Lantern just has a ring. Like he can just take that off. He doesn't have to be Green Lantern. So it's a weird, like they wanted this yet another emotional aspect of the show. We're normal people, but nobody gets us, and we're freaks, and we're being funny, and we have superheroing that we have to do. And it felt so out of character, not even just for the Justice League, but it's so clearly a rip from the X-Men, whether they meant to or not.
Oh, I think it had to have been intentional, because X-Men was so big at that time. And
true, yeah.
It's so, and you know, Steers, to his credit, I mean, his performance is decent enough for what we're getting here, but it's just, you couldn't have at least maybe found a body double or something, because it's
yeah.
I mean, like, I'm not going to criticize, I don't want to criticize anyone's body type, but if you're going to be in a superhero movie, you should maybe not have a beer gut hanging out.
Just have the cape over it the whole time. They seem to be doing that a bit, covering it. Well, in his makeup job, I will say, like, the transfer that I was watching probably hid some of the ugliness of the visual effects, which I will say they're not good, but I wasn't just like vomiting at the sight of the Green Lantern stuff, because I'm like, yeah, this fits the tone of what we're doing, that it looks kind of like rotoscoped almost onto the thing. It's not just hilariously bad. It's more just like inoffensive. But his makeup didn't look terrible, but it did also look like he had felt put onto his face, like padding.
Well, you can see where the neck separation is. I'm just looking at like, I couldn't take my eyes off that freaking neckline.
Well, and his way of playing him seemed to be more along the lines of like knowing Uncle versus someone who has, and who cares? Like, I'm not gonna get pissed off at this version for not getting the depths of John Jones in 1997 on television on CBS of all channels. You know, like NBC, maybe I would hold them to a higher standard. But it's just a funny thing where it's like, well, yeah, this is who it should be, but this also does remind me of like my Uncle Charles Xavier. It would that feeling of having because they even say that he is teaching them to be heroes. Right. He is teaching the Justice League to be heroes, which is something that in a version of the Justice League you could have. I mean, that's something that Martian Manhunter, again, kind of a Swiss Army knife, he could fill that role. Did you notice this? And tell me if you heard it different. They mentioned something about him. He says like he wants to bring justice to our planet because his planet didn't have justice. Something like that. And so the idea almost seems like he's a political refugee from a dictatorship and is trying to be just here because that could not happen on Mars. I mean, this is a throwaway line, so it doesn't deserve a lot of depth. But it's a funny idea. It's like, oh, so you're not even like John Jones, who, I don't know, through time and space was pulled through and left behind. Like, you left your home because it sucks, I guess.
Yes, basically, yeah.
Maybe.
And,
yeah, weird.
But also, too, and this is something that really kind of, I know this is a weird thing to get pissed off about, but it did still piss me off because it's one of the most basic aspects of the character is when, you know, they're escaping the headquarters and and Tori asks about John. He's like, oh, it's 300 degrees is like a beach day on Mars. I'm like, what the fuck?
I know.
That's like his one weakness.
I know.
It's like Superman juggling kryptonite. It just, what?
It's so, yes, it's so blatant that either it's a joke or somebody on the staff, like somebody on the writing staff got fired or underpaid. And they said, oh, by the way, you definitely want him to stick around. Fire is what makes him strong, like to fuck with somebody. Because that is, you're right, it's so blatantly bad. I mean, that whole thing, they're trying to escape their own headquarters, which is being blown up by bad weather. And nobody can even break out of their own headquarters. This is the Justice League.
Well,
you have a Green Lantern.
The thing I found hilarious is that they're all trying to pull on the thing. And it's like, you've got Martian fucking Manhunter who's got Superman level strength. You've got Green Lantern who's got a
Green Lantern.
And it's just like, none of you.
That's the one that kills me. Yeah. I mean, and they are having to write to budget, I'm sure, you know, and the ability of what you can put on screen. And there are funny ways, if they didn't try to play the superhero parts straight, the action parts straight, then they could have, I mean, this is Monday Morning Quarterback or whatever, but that would have been funny if they already had the humor of it, to play to the cheapness of this part. Or if you used characters that were not famously super, super powerful, that you could have played to like, well, oh, we can't help ourselves because all I can do is lift 1 ton, not 1,000 or something like that. And I mean, and you and I have the benefit of having like a lot of knowledge of these characters. So I think I can give it like this, and I'm holding up a tiny amount of space, this much slack for, this is for an audience that doesn't even know who the hell some of these characters or all of these characters are. But if you just, those scenes aren't played for comedy is the thing. Yeah. And so they feel like they should have some weight, and they never will, because they feel like they're on a set somewhere, like on a stage, it's a play, you know? And the thing that was the cringiest actually for me had nothing to do with the superhero stuff. It was just these talking head moments that they had, because they smack of asking actors to improvise in characters that they have not inhabited for very long, and that perhaps don't have a strong improv background. Because what happens, like the whole show opens up with Ice saying, they're all referring to it like all the stuff you're about to see happened in the past, and we're remembering it like it's a funny memory. Like, wasn't it funny when you did this to me and had ice powers? And they'll cut back at seemingly inopportune times, as far as I'm concerned. And they're set in what looks like a Walmart photography studio. Like if you're going to have your family take a picture, it's just like a random color background. And the people interacting, even these actors, seem like they are uncomfortable with each other. Yeah. Though, and even if they're not improvising, I mean, that almost makes it worse that these things were scripted, because they're just talking about, I shrank you down, you shrank down, and I put you in an ice cube, and then beat. Oh yeah, and then I jumped out of the ice cube. I mean, I feel like they shot these and like, oh my God, we are going to not pick this up, just get it out the door and put it on a Sunday night somewhere.
And the ice cube thing, I'm just like, that actually sounds pretty fucking bad. I mean, yeah, you can fucking kill the guy that way.
Yes, you could scare the shit out of somebody that way at very least. Yeah, it's not, when, like I think, and I said it before about the Guy Gardner thing, but I think comedy-wise and character-wise, you are missing on the team. You don't have to have somebody who's just a pure jerk, but I think in the idea of like the 5-man band or whatever the trope is, you have a lancer. You have someone who kind of pokes the air out of either the hero, the leader, or other characters who are eminently positive and leadership material and heroic. Yeah. And no one's really, I mean, on one hand, everyone's fitting a certain type of character, like a sitcom stereotype, a struggling actor, a dummy, a guy who can't get his relationship together, these types of things, but that they're not playing characters with depth or reality to them. Right. But they're not playing roles that fit well with each other, really.
Yeah.
Whether you subscribe to like a 5-man band idea or not, just like you don't have anyone who really rubs anybody the wrong way. The closest is the Flash, and he doesn't do it on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a personality trait. It's just that like he's dumb, and therefore people get annoyed with him.
Yeah.
Which is not sustainable.
Right. And God, some of the character interactions and like the thing that really stood out to me is when you're talking about those weird documentary scenes is that
they're so weird.
When you've got the three of them standing, you got Flash, Fire, and Green Lantern all standing together. It feels it's so staged because it's like okay, look, the lens is only this wide, so you have to stand this close together. And it's like, and we can't afford to cut. We cannot afford to cut, so you have to stay.
And
there.
when they do cut somebody, and that's what makes me think it's improvised, because there are times where they're talking, and then in the middle of them talking, they just like do this weird animation, like, and then the picture goes off screen, and then it's replaced. It's basically a jump cut, is what it would have been, but it's just them again, and they're further along in the conversation or in whatever they were talking about. That makes me think they're like, well, we can't actually edit this. We just have to interrupt you and do that and go along. But you're right. It's very awkward looking, and it's very cheap and thrown together looking, and they really don't add. I mean, take those out completely, and you probably have, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes less, and you could have almost turned this into a reasonable length thing.
Well, I mean, one of the things that jumped out to me at the improv is when they're talking about John, right? And that improv, and that just seems, and it's felt like the director's like, okay, now you're going to talk about Martian Manhunter for 5 minutes.
Yes.
Go. And they're just like, we just got this script this morning. I don't know anything about this guy.
You are hearing the actors, not the characters, talk about this character. Yes. I will say that was the only one that stuck out to me as funny, I think, for that reason, because it honestly, there was a kind of like a fumbling energy of like, oh yeah, sure, John Jones, he's this guy, and he's green, he's very smart, he's a really smart guy. And then at the end, Green Lantern like interrupts them and just says, he's green. Just leans in, and it's not, I think it's the, what feels like frantic energy is what's making me sweat, but also making me laugh at that moment. But I just think of like, I wish, well, you know what's funny is there's a version, I don't know if you ever read, Mark Waid wrote, and Brian Augustin and Barry Kitson drew it, but it was Justice League or JLA Year One. It was a comic series. It was
I haven't read that.
Okay. I don't know how it holds up. I read it when I was reading a bunch of Justice League stuff, and I really like it because this is set in a continuity at the time where Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman were not part of the Justice League's founding members, and it was Black Canary instead of Wonder Woman, and then basically your other big ones.
It was like Flash. It was like it was Barry Allen, Hal Jordan, and I think Green Arrow was in there too.
Yeah, I think he gets brought in there, and Martian Manhunter is there, of course, and it's covering how these characters come to, like, it's a year one where they're coming together for the first time to fight aliens, and then them figuring out, well, do we keep coming back together? Us two, me and Green Arrow and Green Lantern and Flash have a relationship. Black Canary is connected to that person. Them becoming friends and getting to know each other and dealing with this stuff. And it's interesting how it's not the same plot at all, but over 12 issues, I believe it was 12, that they managed to be funny and heartfelt and have superhero stuff. Now, of course, comics, it's not easy, but it's you don't have a budget to deal with, so you believe it if it's drawn well, and it's Barry Kitson, so it was. But it has more of the tone, I think, that if they weren't going for it, they should have gone for it. If you're not going to go for straight comedy, which is generally, I want it to be archly a comedy, that I want it to be dumb and stupid, but this had heart and character relationships that you believed, and without a Batman, Superman, or Wonder Woman, because you don't have to have those to have a Justice League. It's cool if you do. And honestly, if I was going to have one, I really wanted to see a serious take of Batman, like, instead of a Martian Manhunter here. How funny would it be to have, like, I mean, just a dead serious Batman, or even a kind of a crazy Michael Keaton Batman with a little bit of a wild eye, interacting with these white bread like just completely tasteless people, just like that are so unprofessional. I mean, because they're changing in the alleyway Spider-Man style. Like, gotta get back to my job. I'm the Atom, like a Justice League member. By the way, I hope my students are still there when I get back. Like, that's shit. But Batman just looking down on this, like, I can't believe I work with these people. Like, I can see that. That would be a funny foil in a way, or however you want to put it. That would have been great. Obviously, they weren't going to do that. It's Batman. But that's what I wanted to see, was somebody who saw what a bunch of jokers they were.
Yeah, I think also the Adam scene, as a teacher, the Adam scene at the beginning just I'm just like, oh my God, this guy would not. He comes back to the school. And the principal's like, so apparently you had the worst student in class dismiss the students. And it's like,
Yes.
oh yeah, I had a thing. It's like, okay, yeah, well, you know what? We've got a thing too. You're fired.
Yes. Well, and these people, okay, so we've got Fire is a struggling actor, does not seem to have another look. Well, this is what happens when something isn't good. All of the problems jump to the forefront because I will not point out the plot issues or whatever dumb things are in something I'm truly entertained by. It just doesn't, I just don't care. I don't even want to. But you've got Fire, who is a struggling actor, doesn't seem to make money any other way. You've got Adam, who is a professor, or I guess a high school teacher.
High school teacher, it looked like, yeah.
Okay, high school teacher, famously underpaid at all times. You've got the Flash, who is not even employed. You've got Green Lantern, who I believe there's like a software salesman.
That's what it said, yeah.
I want to say, I think Gary Gardner had or maybe Hal Jordan. Somebody had a bad gig like that. That was a Green Lantern at some point. But these are people who, just like Friends, have no money, should not have money, but live in an amazing house. At least three of them live in like a huge, beautiful house together. I wanted them all to live there so it could be like the real world Justice League edition. That would honestly, that concept I would be more interested in.
I mean, they basically did, because even though Barry has his own apartment, he gets evicted at the beginning.
He moves in.
And then he moves in, and Fire spends all her time there anyway, so it's like she lives there.
It's true. It is like they live across the street.
The weird thing about the Barry of it and him asking if he could room with, Adam and Green Lantern is that you've got a fucking undersea base. That thing is huge. I mean, why couldn't you just?
A good point.
I mean, does John not have like a couch you could crash on for a few nights?
Well, and if you weren't throwing, I have to question why you're so unemployable if you're going to throw it in my face all the time that you are unemployed and can't keep a job going. Because it's one thing to just be forgetful, but that's not. You also have true light speed movement at your disposal. I mean, at one point he's hired on as a mailman, and then actually, you know what? It wasn't bad, this joke, to me. He was a mailman for a split second. It was just like a scene. He comes back. He has his bag. They're all like, oh, are you coming back to get more mail or taking a break? He's like, no, I already finished my whole thing, because he's the Flash. And he goes inside, and all the other mailmen look at each other, and one says, we got to hold a meeting. Like, as if to imply, it feels like a Newman Seinfeld thing of like, we're famously bad at our jobs. We're slow mailmen. We cannot have this guy showing us up. And the implication of that's funny, but all these things are coming from like not the people and not on purpose when it comes to laughs.
And that's the thing, like I can forgive the superhero stuff being bad and being, under budget and all that. I can forgive a lot of that, but you have to give me something else. But even like just the regular talking scenes it looks like the cinematography in this is, and when the thing that kills me is that I'm watching this thing and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, I'm like, somebody got paid to make this shit.
Somebody paid Warner Brothers to allow them to make this thing, who they had to pay people to make the thing. Like, a lot of people paid money and were paid to do this. And you gotta, I mean, it is always that thing, like with any production, because it's never three people, it's like a bunch of people involved. Like, where in this was the breakdown? Where did it go wrong? Or how many people did it pass that they said, yeah, sure, green light on this thing right here? I mean, this thing to me smacks of, at some point, okay, we know this is not going to work, so we have to finish it and just release it into the world. Or right or wrong, I could be, maybe they thought they could do this. I kind of want to know what their idea was for the show weekly if this did get picked up.
Yeah.
Not because I think it would be good, but what did they think they were going to do with, you can't do 80 minutes a week. That's not allowed, and you certainly couldn't keep up with it production-wise, not in that era. So I don't even know what they were trying to make happen with this thing as a pilot, but yeah, it was going to be a challenge no matter what. To make a Justice League television show live action is a tall order, no matter what version you're trying to do. So I don't think they had the right idea at all, but it was not going to be, I mean, I wouldn't want to do that now. I wouldn't think they could do it well, frankly.
Well, I mean, even thinking about some of the stuff that we do have now, like you look at I think probably the closest comparison you could get to this is maybe Legends of Tomorrow.
Mhm.
But and effects aside, like it's got that, it's it's much more focused on the character dynamics and all of that. But it's it's not a great show, but there's an earnestness to it. There's a ballsiness that it has to it, that like they're willing to swing for the fences with it, even if, and they're willing to take chances that this will probably be stupid, but we're going to do it anyway. This one,
there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, I mean, you got to respect, like I said, it's not a great show, but you got to respect the fact that they're willing to have like a giant stuffed animal fight a demon. it's wacky,
swings.
It's stupid, but it's you got to respect it.
Absolutely. I haven't watched that show, but I mean, to take a big swing, I mean, in performance in general, it is make a choice, make a bold choice, whatever it is, whether it's the craziest thing or like you're just dedicated to this one very realistic version or whatever it is. And nobody, actors, writers, whoever, directors, involved in this seem to do that. There's not a strong feeling of it is kind of confusing what they want from you as a viewer. Yeah. Like, what do they want to evoke in you? And maybe that's a deep question to ask of what's essentially a sitcom with superheroes, but because it's not evoking anything but confusion and frustration from me, I'm wondering what their goal was. And I mean, I guess Friends had been on for a couple seasons at this point, right?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. So, I mean, I do feel like that the idea of, it's not dramedy, but this idea of we can have soap opera elements, which is already part of superhero comics at large anyway, not necessarily the Justice League, but a lot of teams, that's how they work, to have that mixed in with a comedy, and that there's romantic, like Green Lantern and Fire used to date, and that's kind of a back and forth thing. These things all feel like they are very much of the era. It's funny how, because of how it looks, maybe because it's shot in Canada again, I believe, it does look older than 97, but that also means that I'm older than I think, is what I think it is. Because when I'm a kid, I would be like, I could spot if something's like shot in the 60s or 70s or 80s because of film stock. I didn't know what that was, but you observe these things. And now if I see something even from the early 2000s, I'm like, oh, that looks old. No, I was alive then. That can't look old. And this had that effect.
The weird thing is when I'm watching, especially, I think the one that really jumped out at me was when Barry's getting evicted, and it's like, because
oh my god,
the way it's filmed there, and I'm just like,
yeah,
this feels like somebody with a handheld camera in their backyard.
Yes, it's poor. Some of the choice, I mean, I will, cinematography wise, there are some choices, whether I like them or not, that it reminded me of Malcolm in the Middle, kind of where you do this sweeping, like it's not handheld, but it feels like a very sweeping movement that almost is dramatic or an epic, but like for two people talking.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes it cartoony. But that moment did feel, you're absolutely right, like a YouTube demo of a movie that somebody's working on, down to the actor, to me, the weakest actor of the bunch, the guy playing Barry Allen, is just one, he looks like he's 12 years old. Like he looks like he's straight out of high school, and he's just like trying to be this non-big swing character. I'm dumb, but I'm sweet, but I'm not gonna be extra dumb. I'm not gonna take it to that level of like, I'm gonna be a jock, I'm gonna be this. Like, it just is like, oh, but I need a job. Oh, okay, I'll be back later, I gotta go save the world. Everything feels like it's about 30% of a choice of where it could have been even a shitty thing, and we would all remember it like the Corman Fantastic Four of like, oh my god, what a amazing piece of shit this is. And this is sadly not that. It can't give us that energy.
Well, I mean, I was thinking about, you mentioned the Roger Corman Fantastic Four, and I was thinking about that because even that had an earnestness to it.
Yeah.
There's, the people involved, they were pretty passionate about what they were doing. It's still a piece of shit, but you can respect the earnestness. Like, this doesn't even have that. It's just like everybody is just completely phoning it in. And one of the things that I got to mention this is a bit of a tangent, but it kept bugging me when I saw it in the movie. It's the beginning of the movie when the whole Justice League is going around saving things and using their powers. The best thing they could think of for the Atom to do is to get a cat out from under the house.
I know. I thought, Perry, I'm on your side, and I was right there with you. As a cat owner, I was like, well, I appreciate what he's doing, But I was like, hey, I've seen Superman save cats in comics before, but that's Superman. Like that's him showing you that's him kissing babies basically as a presidential candidate. Like that's him doing the small work coming down from the mountain.
And he's not
like,
doing it in the middle of a massive tragedy.
Of a threat. Well, yeah, and it's like you chose the Atom because you could make a nebbish guy out of him. But like, yeah, if this is your threat, what are you going to do with this guy week in and week out?
Yeah. And
you got to think of that.
And speaking of the stereotypes of it, like the Atom is he's just like, if you could think of the most stereotypical nerdy character, you would picture this guy. Right down to the freaking bow tie.
Bow tie. He's got the kind of like the frizzy hair, the glasses, the sweater vest over the shirt. I mean, it is like, I mean, that's, and I will say that to me is moving in. If that's your choice, yes, go ahead and move in that direction. There's a version of this where everybody is extra, even more normal than this. Because nobody's ugly. That sounds terrible, but nobody's ugly. Nobody's like a superstar. It doesn't feel, I mean, I think Michelle Hurd is very beautiful, but that's not the point. Being that like nobody's like a star that you're bringing in from something else.
Right.
And then nobody is drawing attention with their appearance. So either make somebody like really, really attractive and the other people not, or something that because you've also got 3 brunette, white, cisgender males, like as most of your team. You have Michelle Hurd, who is of mixed descendant, and and then Kim Oja as Ice, who's also white. And it's like, but those 3 guys, it's so hard to tell them apart, even if they're not wearing their costumes.
Oh, especially Barry and Guy. Like, if not for the fact that Barry's just so incompetent, like I don't think I'd be able to tell them apart.
I agree. And so I think a version of this would be to make everybody cast the most character actor people-looking people, like people that the Coen brothers would cast in these types of roles, where it's like nobody, I mean, maybe somebody's built, but they also have like just that kind of face that you're like, oh man, I don't know where you've been. You've got character behind that, which, I mean, and these are all asks that are, you know, it's a little late at this point, being 2022, but like that is an option, I think, here, if you're going to play the realness of this, versus trying to hire people that may turn into the next Courtney Cox or whatever, to hire people that are like, let's make this the everyman because they're having to deal with all these things. What if Green Lantern or the Flash was really like a super schlubby guy who is just trying to make ends meet, and make me believe that with the actor,
right?
And show me the gut and show me the acne or whatever it might be. And that's not very Justice League, but at this point we've already broken that mold.
Yeah, I also did think it was funny that you think about the Justice League and like in all their glamour and splendor and like everything they've had in the comic books and other in the movies and the animated series, and they've got all these amazing bases of operation, right? The watchtower on the moon, the floating satellite, and here we've got a derelict spaceship underneath a graffiti-strewn bridge. When they're taking her there, I'm just like, a bunch of weirdly dressed guys are taking me to a bridge. I'm like, I'd be worried something else is going to happen to me here.
Oh, well, at one point, you know, after at the very end, Ice, you know, she feels, I guess she was left behind while they did other stuff to save the world. And that hurt her feelings. So but then she went and saved everything. Ultimately, the new person becomes the savior. You know, what we've seen 1,000 times before. And then they all come to her house and basically break into her house because she doesn't want to see them. She's upset with them for not trusting her or something. And they're like, "Are you still going to be in the Justice League? Please say yes." And eventually she says yes. And as they're leaving, she asks the Atom, and they've been a romantic, you know, tease up to this point. She says, what would have happened if I had said no to join the Justice League? And a very real moment passes where the Atom's like, you don't want to know.
Yeah, I'm like, what the hell is that?
I take this to be that Martian Manhunter would have erased her memory of all this happening.
At best.
I mean, Jesus. That's my hope. But that's a very dark, and then she's kind of like, okay. And then they move on with it. But there are some weird moments of darkness that I don't think are intended, but I gotta assume that's what they meant. Yeah. And again, maybe Chuck Xavier might do that, but I don't think John would do that unless you threaten one of his friends. Maybe. Maybe I could see that happening.
Well, also too,
but
I think there's a version of this movie you can make if you really commit to the parody aspect of it. Like, for example, one of the things is when she's finding out that she has the ice powers and she's walking home And the skateboarder or whatever, he falls into the creek. He's like, oh, no, and she freezes it. And it's just like, it's a fucking creek in the middle of a suburb. I mean, what are you...
Right.
And he's treating it like he just got dumped in the Pacific.
Right. Oh yeah. No, that was because one, it feels so 90s because it's like a guy rollerblading or skateboarding or whatever it is, just and fully padded up. You know, it probably is like as required by CBS to not send the wrong message to any kids. But yeah, it is like, what are you even doing out here? I mean, they have a few scenes where they have extras like they have to fill in the background, but even those are pretty sparsely attended. And this is a thing where it's like she's in the park and there's one person in the park and it's this guy who's flipping over into the thing. I almost like thought at the moment, I was like, don't freeze the water. You're going to kill this guy.
That's what
like,
I thought too. Yeah.
It could be The Boys level, like gore or violent, accidental violence stuff. I mean, that's there are a number of ways that we've seen, I guess, you know, like superhero. It seems like with superhero comedy, like we had to start doing superhero at a certain level, one of social acceptance and understanding, and two of just quality, before we could start adding the second genre level of, okay, this is a superhero comedy. I mean, obviously we have comedy in the Marvel movies. That's kind of almost, you can't remove it. But as far as it being, but this isn't even an action adventure movie. This is a comedy that happens to be this. Like we had to start doing it right just with the superhero part, and then we started trying to tweak it and add, well, this is a superhero horror movie, or this is a superhero comedy, or something like that. And I feel like this is trying to, I mean, it's doing a lot of things. It's trying to run before it walks, because we have not even had a team superhero live action show that just works as that, let alone trying to balance or spin the many plates of a Friends sitcom, a pseudo dramedy, or all these things at once. And that's a place where it's,
in that way, it reminds me a little bit of Mystery Men in that way, because Mystery Men kind of had that same problem where it was a parody movie before there was really anything to parody.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Yes. I agree. I like that movie, but it is more like, I just like all the actors that are involved, and I'm glad that they had something to go do. But it especially as for how it would have been received at the time, and what it had to work with. I mean, it would kind of be like if you released even a great parody of comic book culture from the 80s in the 90s. Who would understand that? You and me, because we grew up reading comics. Like, that's not what's happening here. I wish that was happening here. But yeah, I feel like, and it'll be interesting to see, because I mean, I think.
Wait, here's a good way. Really, it's like releasing Galaxy Quest in 1970.
Boom. That is exactly right. Yes. But when it exists, but there's no pop culture awareness of the thing. It hasn't entered the pop culture awareness.
Right.
That's that's the right way to put it. Like I think superheroes and comedy, I mean, there's so much that's there to be mined in superheroes, whether you go deep into like the dumb continuity things that we all, as comic book fans that have read for a long time, can make fun of, or just the very basic ideas of them, because it's a deep pool to do that from. But I'm interested to see where that can go, and what you can do with that. That's not just the MCU version of, well, everybody's pithy, everybody has one-liners, because I've enjoyed a lot of those movies, but a lot of them, I think, end up being not as funny as they could be, because it's diluted by everybody has this same attitude, or too many characters are the funny guy. Like, this guy has to be funny too, and it's not even in his own way, or whatever it is. But like I mean, because I think The Boys, I find it, even though there is drama to it for sure. Have you watched that?
Yeah, I've watched the first 2 seasons.
I find it to be, when it's funny, very funny, and it's choosing that in those moments. I mean, I think it's just a good production overall, and it is quite. It's not fair to compare this show to it, but it's chasing comedy in a world where that is basically a mirror version of Marvel and DC universes. So the things that we would want made fun of as like deep fans of that stuff are also managing to be made fun of, as well as just the pure situational, hey, I'm an invisible guy, and what happens if you do this to me?
Well, I think stuff. I think the Deadpool movies have also done a really good job of that. I think, because
I haven't seen those, so
you've got to see those. There's this. It's a serious. It's a. I don't want to say not necessarily serious, but respectful take on the character, right? Where it's earnest, but it's also, there's an element of parody in it, which the best Deadpool comics have had that element of parody in them, and that does a really good job. You got to check those out; they're great.
I think I'm I assign myself this title, and it sounds like I think a lot of myself. I think I'm not an iconoclast. I am oppositional, and I won't say anything, but I'm like, oh, everybody likes that thing? I'm not going to watch it right now. And then like 10 years later, I'm like, guys, have y'all seen The Wire? It's amazing. I didn't do that with The Wire. I was just late to the bus anyway. But like that I think that's part of why with Deadpool, I'm like, oh, everybody likes this. And I don't have a lot of affinity for Ryan Reynolds, but everybody did like those movies, and I'm a comic book guy, so I should see them.
Well, I'll give you the best endorsement I can think of is, Derek famously hated Deadpool.
Boom.
Never understood. He dug those movies.
Cool.
So that's
the best.
That's the best. Yeah, that's the best.
I take that 100%. Like, I don't really even have much experience with him in the comics. The character of Phantom X from New X-Men being a pseudo like parody of him. I guess as far as like I'm the secret agent guy with the hidden face that's hurt. Like that's probably the closest I've gotten, because I think the era of X-Men that he was first introduced in and then prominently featured in, I wasn't there reading for that. And then once he had his own thing, I think I had switched over to DC, honestly, mostly because in my teenage years, it was Green Lantern, not realizing that Kyle Rayner, even though I know Spider-Man inside and out, who doesn't, like, I didn't at the time realize that Kyle Rayner was just Peter Parker. Like that was the whole point. It's like, he's a guy who gets power and then someone he cares about gets killed. And now he's this guy, but something about him drew me, and that was my superhero for a long time. And I just was not reading any Marvel stuff for a while there, when things like Deadpool, I think, were probably
in fact, I think Joe Kelly.
Joe Kelly, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, and I think it actually was the exact same time that Morrison started JLA. I think it was like 97, 98. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I definitely watch those two movies. And also there's kind of like a PG-13 cut of Deadpool 2 that they released called Once Upon a Deadpool. And it's they added extra footage where they had Deadpool kidnap Fred Savage and tie him up like in Princess Bride, and read him the story of Deadpool 2.
Oh, and that's funny.
That is worth seeing just for the scenes with Fred Savage.
He's great. Fred Savage, I mean, obviously he's a legend if you just cut his career off after Wonder Years even.
Yeah.
But knowing that he's done so much directing of truly hilarious stuff, like Always Sunny, he directed a lot of those, and I believe he was a producer on that. He just seems so game to do anything. And it's great when someone like has an awareness of their pop culture currency value, and yet doesn't make that their whole identity. That it's like, oh, I'm a guy at conventions now, which is nothing to say bad of that. But if it's like someone who presents like that's all you ever get from them, and that's not him, but it seems like, especially through what you're talking about, he's somebody who can appreciate like, yeah, it would be funny if this person would do this for this reason. Yeah. All right, man, I'll put him on the list.
Definitely check those out. Yeah.
I mean, if I was willing to watch.
If you're willing to watch this.
I was willing to watch this. I should be willing to watch some movies that people generally like. Yes.
So in fact, here, I'm going to put something out there on the air here. So we already covered Deadpool and Deadpool 2 on this show, but we have not yet covered Once Upon a Deadpool. So if you watch those, if you watch Once Upon a Deadpool and you want to come back and talk about that, let me know.
Perry, I'd love to come back and talk about anything, man.
Anytime,
That included, yeah. I really enjoyed the show, and I'm so glad to reconnect with you and get to chat about this stuff. No one in my life has quite the certain pedigree of interests for this to be any more than a 2-minute conversation of, hey, there was a Justice League movie pilot that sucked on CBS in 1997. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, it is. That's the end of the conversation. Yeah, man. If it's Deadpool, whatever it is, I'm there for it.
Anything, yeah. Well, more than welcome to come back. So, and we're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves, but let's go ahead and wrap up this. So, any final thoughts about Justice League? One final thought I had is the opening credits of this too. Like when the title credits, like even that is so low budget and bad. I'm just
well, you would think if you saw that fresh, if you didn't know where this came from, and that just started up, and it's just like, red, white, and blue Justice League of America coming at you like block letters on a black screen, I would assume that I'm watching something that is a satire, that is a parody of, like, what if they made Justice League of America in the early 80s or something, and it was a bad show, and this is what it would look like. They would play this.
Right, like something someone does on YouTube or something.
Exactly. And it's not that. It is that they meant to do that, apparently.
Yeah.
And I know, here's the thing, like, one, for all the slack that you may want to, like, I may want to give it in places, there are things like that that are just like, that literally couldn't have cost any more to make that good. Like, if you could just make the title,
I mean, they just look like they
better.
used a regular Arial font or something.
Yeah,
they didn't even
it's
do
pretty
anything.
rough. Well, and also on the air, because I was thinking in watching, I was like, oh, is stuff just not very funny in 1997, which is a stupid way to think. But I mean, I'm like, look, Frasier and Seinfeld are both still on the air at this point, and CBS also has, I mean, I'm not the hugest fan, but Everybody Loves Raymond. They have a bunch of shows that at least are beloved at this time and have given me a chuckle, so I cannot just write off 1997 as like a comedy wasteland. That would be the stupidest thing. That this is just, you know, it's just one blip in the middle of, I'm sure they're just trying to get stuff made. Why it's on CBS specifically, I don't know. Maybe they just had more holes in their schedule.
It was kind of, if I remember correctly, it was kind of pitched as Friends with superpowers.
Yeah.
And you could definitely see that. Like you said, they basically have Ross, Chandler, and Joey basically in there.
Well, and I kind of wish, I mean, we keep pitching versions of it, but what if they shot it like is it a 2 or 3 cam sitcom, like a Friends, like shoot it like with two angles on sets. I mean, clearly these are things that would change elements of the whole thing, but that would at least tell me that you know the level of what you're doing as a television filmmaker, or however you want to put it. Like, that would tell me something that I'm supposed to not take this part seriously. Or what if you cut back and forth between a sitcom, you know, like not single cam but multicam show, and then when it was superhero time, you went out into the field and shot it with a single cam or with, you know, whatever you want to call that. Like those are things that just, like, there was not, where there was experimentation, it was very minimal, and it was not on the things that needed tweaking.
Well, I think too also is this made me think of there was a meme going around shortly after the first Avengers movie came out, where people were saying, like, I just want I want an Avengers TV show where they're just interacting with each other, and it's like where like Loki's yelling at a toaster because he can't figure out how it works, and like Tony Stark is just sitting there like, I can't believe I got to deal with these people, and it's like, yeah, that would work, because you're finding humor in the fact that there are these everyday things that they can't work with.
And I mean, obviously these are all beloved characters, even well before they were on the screen, that we're talking about in that case, like the Avengers characters. What we also have in many of them, and specifically, like, let's say a Loki and an Iron Man, are great actors who have created a character. They've created their version of this character that has, I mean, whatever depth you want to call it, it may not, if you ask them their backstory, they may not even know. I don't know what they did, what their process is. But you're talking about people who just have screen presence no matter what they're doing. I mean, this is clear with like Robert Downey Jr. I mean, it's like this is always his appeal. You put him on screen, we're interested because whatever he's doing is interesting. He's an appealing person. And that is the first step, I think, is that there wasn't a lot of star power being wielded on screen on this.
Well,
and
that
so,
too,
yeah,
and there also
that.
wasn't a lot of creativity been in like how and like the problems the characters face. They're all very generic problems. Like, I mean, at the very least, give me something connected to their superpowers, right?
Yeah,
like, you know, one thing is perfect in a superhero sitcom. The Flash is super fast. You know, he's too fast in bed. Something like that, right?
Boom.
It's dumb. It's stupid, but it at least makes sense for that character. Or like they're talking like the Atom. You know, he has trouble. Maybe he's always short, or maybe sometimes he's trying
to get his height right.
He's trying to get his height right. Like, you know, maybe he meets this girl and he decides I'm gonna eat, and she's charmed by him, and she meets him when he's tall, and then right before the date he can't get himself to grow high enough, so he's like, you know, now he's really short. Some stupid little thing like that would be so much better than what we get. Because
the concept, I mean, that's the thing, is like on paper, the concept of so many great comedies, and let's just say even sitcoms, on paper is dumb. It's all stupid. That's the point. It's like it's a jumping off point, and the things that make it great. I mean, I'm dissecting comedy now, which is like the dumbest thing to do, but is that like, well, you have the people that are funny, and what are the unique twists that you put on that, even if it's just the dialogue? What are the things? But on paper, it doesn't have to be good, is just that it exists, basically. Like, so where you're talking about, like, I was half shrank when she met me, and she seemed to like that. Now I think she's going to know that I'm actually too tall, and she only likes me at this height. Like, that's a dumb thing, but that's just if you've had somebody who could if you had writers and you had the right actor to portray that and that situation, that can absolutely be an entire episode of a thing.
Right,
because we've done more with less and made good shows.
Well, I mean, I think that
I'm a
read
huge
something that
Seinfeld
like,
fan, so.
well, Seinfeld's a good example because if I read something that if cell phones existed, like 90% of Seinfeld episodes could not be done.
There's a great, I followed a few, one of them's on Twitter. I think it's like called Modern Day Seinfeld, but there's also a script running around basically trying to take Seinfeld and move it into the modern day. It becomes a pretty fun thing because you can do the same type of humor, but you're absolutely right. A lot of the plots go away, but that's true of like a lot of thrillers too. A lot of things that change, but there's a script. Oh, I think there's a script that's been around for a long time that was Seinfeld after 9/11. And what they were dealing with after that. It's really great. Like, I mean, I read it online back when, and but the point being, like, how would you handle this situation as these characters? And they handled it exactly like they would usually handle any of that stuff. And that's the thing, is the concept is not, it is high concept, I guess. And then it's like, what happens today? That today is the day when blah, blah, blah happens. And then you go from there. And I think there are a lot of opportunities, or there could have been opportunities with either these characters or these types of characters. I think you're totally right. Yeah. To have, I mean, hell, you can have a mind switch so easily with Martian Manhunter. He's doing the whole thing of you're on a date and he's trying to feed you the lines to do the date because he's actually in love with the person. You know, it's dumb shit like that, but just with superheroes. We would all watch
like
that. I'd show up for that.
Or he's an incompetent telepath, and like, you know, he's trying to read someone's mind and ends up,
there you go,
you know, erasing it or something like that.
Yes. And they just weren't. I mean, I'm gonna guess that for starters, producers and networks were not looking. The whole thing seems like it was written to please somebody.
Right. Who that is, I have no idea. Yeah.
Well, and I guess I mean like nobody.
Funny
no
thing
hard
is,
battles were fought.
No. Funny thing is, Louis Teague, who's he'd done a lot of work with Roger Corman. He'd done a lot of directing stuff, TV, movies, and stuff like that. He was brought in to try and, because they're having problems. They're like, we can't make this work. And so they brought in Louis Teague, and he tried the best he could. And even still, he's like, look, don't put my name on this piece of shit. Right.
It's an Alan Smithy situation.
Yeah. Well, there is another director credited, Felix Enriquez Alcala, but
and he worked. I mean, it's funny because he worked on Lewis and Clark. I mean, he did like an episode of that, but he also worked on Sliders. He worked on ER for 12 episodes. So
he worked on Battlestar Galactica too.
Well, he also worked on Breaking Bad. I mean, and he won, I believe, an Emmy for one of his Battlestar Galactica episodes. But all that, that is neither here nor there because television is not really a director's medium.
Right.
Like that it is much more the writer and then the producers, I would say, more than that. So I mean, I could blame things on him or not, who knows.
Right.
But
Kevin Smith talked about that when he directed some of the CW superhero stuff, when he's just basically like, because he came in like for like some second or third season episodes. And he brought him in. It's like basically everyone knows what they're doing. Like I don't really do much there.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not. I mean, obviously it is different, but like what Feige does with the Marvel movies, there's a certain like that's kind of a scaled up version of that. Obviously, some of the directors bring a little bit more of something, and they're handling a bigger production. But there is kind of someone who's in charge of the overall, not just what's happening with stories, but with. And not the overall thrust, but the actual tone and even visual language of all this stuff. And that's, one common complaint that I would have a lot of times, that minus maybe the Guardians of the Galaxy stuff, a lot of the way that Marvel movies look is very samey, and I'm not a huge fan of that. And that's not why I'm there anyway, so I don't care that much. But I think, if like, I was looking at the director for this, and I was like, I don't know what this guy did here. He probably did. He asked for the third take of something. I don't really know. I could give him a lot of credit. I could give him no credit. I don't know. But it's funny because you see people who work on television like this, and you look up their credits, and you're like, oh, well, they did a bunch of work. And some of it is stuff that I think is a piece of shit, and some of it's great. And with television work that's not the writer's room or the producer or the actor, it's like it ends up being like, yeah, you've worked on like 1,000 things. And even if you are some of those, you are. And it's a weird thing. I don't know, growing up as a kid, I would have assumed if I knew what a director was and a writer, I'm like, so there's one of each and they make the thing and it comes out this how they wanted. And like, no, there's a billion moving parts that are happening, and so many people that you're trying to please, including sponsors, and a billion besides them.
Yeah. And And it goes back. That reminds me of something Derek said. We were talking about the Superman Lives documentary, and just like that kind of shows you behind the scenes of Hollywood. And Derek even said, like, you know, one of the things that movie kind of shows you is that it's amazing we get as many good movies as we do with everything that happens behind the scenes.
It is. I mean, and what's funny is that, you know, the argument of that many of us liked, I've certainly done it, where it's like, if these producers would just get out of the way, or if this person, how many times has someone that we were like, a director we really love or whoever, gotten to do exactly what they wanted and it sucks? That happens too, because they're not any more, you know, infallible than the others. So sometimes you want someone needs to be there to be the brakes on your thing. You know, sometimes the director's cut isn't the good cut. It's just not. Right. So like, there's a necessary, and I don't even want to call it a necessary evil, because production is his own art, depending on what kind of production we're talking about. But like, there's so many parts to it. How do you even say who's responsible for the good stuff in a film? I this is a big question. Like, if someone is acting well in front of you, they did that. Right. But did if you don't like their performance, did the director tell them to go that direction that you don't like? Is it their fault? Did the producer tell them they want it to be an arch movie or a flat movie or a whatever? Like, it's just so. Right. The days of blaming one person for a movie's failure, I feel like I need to get past that myself, because it's not realistic. All
right. Well, so, I mean, basic summation on this has not been officially released as far as I know, but you can watch it on Daily Motion, and you can find it you can find it anywhere online. Even still, I'd recommend you don't, because it's just so bad. You'd be better off going to Six Flags and just taking pictures with the DC character, like, cosplay people they have there, I think. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, it's just, and it would have better production values than this piece of shit did.
They look great. Yeah.
It's just, oh God, it's so terrible.
Man, and it's such a bland ride. It's just a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I'll say this about when I was watching when Derek and I covered Steel, one of the last movies we talked about, you know, we watched that movie and it was also terrible, but you know what? It was actually kind of fun to talk about because it was so terrible. Exactly. But this one is just like, even though I've enjoyed talking with you, like if I had someone else on this episode, I don't think we'd be able to go on for as long. I think it's.
Well, I've got about 4 or 5 different Post-its worth of notes that I had in the background just in case. Okay. Just of like, I'm like, look, man, I might freeze up and just have nothing to say about this thing because. It is like giving a restaurant review of a place that only serves chicken noodle soup. It's just, or broth even. Like, it's just, what do you say about how good or bad it is? And we did it. We did it.
Yeah. All right, Will. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for coming on. Thank you. Tell people again where they can find you.
Sure. So I'm on Twitter. I am at WillShortHaha. And I think that speaks for itself. You can find my podcast, Days Past Tooncast, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those places. If you want to follow us on Instagram or Twitter, we are at DP Tooncast, and dptooncast.com is our website. You can find our stuff there too.
Okay, great. And like I said before, you know, anytime you want to come on back, love to have you back. We'll be talking. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I loved it.
All right. Thanks for listening. This is Superhero Cinephiles. Superherocinephiles.com is the website. Super Cinema Pod on both Twitter and Instagram. And we got the Facebook group as well. Please make sure to like us, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get you shows. And reminder, we got the 100th episode is the next one. So if you're listening to this now and 100th episode hasn't come out yet, we're opening it up. So if you want to leave a message to plan the show, any questions or comments, go ahead and email me, superherocinephiles@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Super Cinema Pod. Join our Facebook group by searching for Superhero Cinephiles, where you can interact with us and other superhero fans. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a regular supporter at Patreon or make a one-time donation through PayPal, both of which can be found at our website, superherocinephiles.com. If you buy or rent any movies through the Amazon links at our site, it helps support the show. Please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.